Hey, welcome back, folks. Hope you had a good week off. Um, the semester's about halfway over, and we are continuing on in our book in chapter 4, which is The World of the Image. We're going to talk about all the different kinds of variations you can have when you're talking about imagery and sort of some of the different things you can do with that. Whenever you first think of an image, you probably think of a photograph, and that is generally the most literal representation of the subject matter, whatever that might be. Um, and really, and that's what an image is. It's a representation of an idea or a subject, okay? But there are a lot of different ways you can alter that image to go along with your idea, what you want to convey better. And that's kind of what we do as designers. Our job is to find an image that really speaks to our idea the best way, and that includes the medium, whether it's a photograph or an illustration. If it's an illustration, what you use, if you use paint or charcoal or ink or whatever. And if it's a photograph, is it black and white? Is it color? All these things, you really need to think about what is going to best serve my purpose. What am I trying to get across? What kind of idea am I trying to convey? And using all of these tools, you can really kind of pinpoint your message a lot better if you're conscious of these things. So let's talk about photography for a second. That's generally the most common image in our culture, and it is the most direct representation. There's not anything else that needs to be figured out. Why did the designer use this medium? Why these colors? What's he trying to say? If it's just a color photograph of something, that is no bones about it. That's what it is. You take a picture of a dog, and that's a dog. There's not any message behind it. So often, though, people just, when they just throw a picture on a page, they'll just bring in a picture in a square, put it on the page, in a column of text or something if you're laying out a spread or something like that, or an article. And that's it. And they really don't put too much thought into it. They just find a picture of something related to the article, it might be, and that's it. And there's really so much more you can do with it. It's kind of a shame that so many people do that, don't really put more thought into it. Just talking about photography, there's a wide range. You have the literal photograph that's color. If there's a wide range of tonal value, meaning there's shadows, there's midtones, and there's highlights, that's generally considered a good photograph. But from that, you can springboard into, depending on your subject matter, if it's about a historical event, maybe you want to make the photo black and white, or even add a little bit of yellow to it or something to make it look like an old-time photo. If it's you can add odd colors to a photo to give it sort of a surreal aspect, just depending on what your subject matter is and what the message is you want to convey. You can blur the photo, or you can just destroy it basically so it looks kind of grungy, and if you're going for like a inner city modern grunge kind of effect. So a lot of things you can do just with a photo. Okay, from that you can move on into, and on page 166 there's a really neat sort of not timeline, but a span of what you can do with your imagery. And it starts out very literal, just actual photograph, okay, accurate color. Then as it moves towards, and you got literal on one side and abstract at the far end. Abstract is so far from the original subject, it's you might not even be able to tell what it is. And in between, you have different things. Starting with literal, you might move over, you might change the colors or something, or make it black and white. Then if you start to just look at outlines maybe, or start to really look at things as shapes instead of objects, you get into more concrete and iconic ideas. An icon is basically it's a representation of something that's stripped down. You get rid of the unnecessary details. That's sort of how you get an icon. We'll talk a little more about that. And then abstract is all the way down to where, chances are people might not even know what that is. It's much more of a personal interpretation sort of thing. So, you start with photography. That's really the most literal thing. Okay, and that's the way, and that really is useful if you just want to represent something. If you're talking about a building downtown that needs to be renovated or something like that, for example, it might help to take a picture of that building. And an illustration of the building probably wouldn't be nearly as effective. So in that case, that would be a good thing. But let's say you want to really kind of, conduct convey an idea more than that. That's where you can start to get into different things. And it talks about image modes and mediation on page 168 and 169 of your chapter. The mode is basically what it is. If it's a drawing or painting or whatever it is. And the mediation is how much you adapt that, how much you change it for your own uses. If you make it abstract or whatever. And if there's kind of a neat study on 168 of a woman, female form, and there's the photograph, which is kind of the literal interpretation. Then there's looks like a charcoal sketch, which is more of a artistic interpretation. And you can see how each one of these has kind of a different feel to it. And so you need to start just thinking about that and understanding that. All right, so let's talk about illustration now. They're very realistic illustrations. A lot of us aren't very good at those. It takes a lot of skill to accurately represent what a photo could easily represent. But that's, there might be instances for that. Like I think there's a Heinz label on here on 173 where they're illustrations of fruits, but they're very realistic illustrations of fruits and vegetables. And in this case, they use that because it's kind of the idealized, perfect fruit and vegetable. There's no blemishes or anything like that. And in that case, if you're trying to give this idealized, perfection, illustration is a good thing. More so, illustration is used because you can convey ideas that maybe you couldn't, or it'd be a lot more difficult with photography. Or to add, because illustration is intrinsically human. So it's something that we've created. So if you're using an illustration, it definitely has more of a personal sense to it versus a photograph. And so, there's a big spectrum with illustration too. You have realistic illustration all the way over to abstract illustration, and it gets simpler and simpler as it goes. One of my old jobs, we used stock photography a lot, and I remember one job in particular. We just couldn't find. They wanted a very specific image, but they wanted a photograph. And we didn't have a budget to do a photo shoot, so I spent hours looking for a photograph that I just couldn't find. And finally, I talked the client into, I said, you're going to save a lot of money if we just do an illustration. And we ended up doing a whole series of illustrations for this job, and it turned out really well because we were able to get exactly what we wanted, and we didn't have to worry about finding a photo of it. So anyway. When you're talking illustration, you have very realistic illustration, and it gets simpler and simpler into what we call an icon. An icon is basically, this is what people use a lot for logo design, or when you really want to kind of strip down the unnecessary stuff and just get the nugget of information that you want to convey. And that's what an icon is. It's where you look at an object and you kind of get rid of all the information that you don't need. Usually, you might make it black and white to start out with. So it's just a black shape that you're working with. And using positive and negative space, if it's, for instance, there's an example of B, a black B icon and a key on 171. And they've really, these are abstract representations, but we see them literally as a key and a bumblebee just because of our knowledge and what, our cultural reference, or not cultural, but what we've seen in our lives, and so that's a neat way to represent something, because it kind of gets rid of all the information you don't need and just focuses on that. It's easily recognizable. That's why logos a lot of time use a very simplified representation of something to get their idea across, because that way they don't have to, there's not extra information. They really strip it down.